Hi everybody, this is Futch. Welcome to Patreon. Patreon is a subscription service that connects artists with their supporters in a unique, exciting, and fun way. Now, I'm just one of over 50,000 creators on the service, and every month there's over 1 million active patrons. My patrons all receive unlimited access to an extensive back catalog of books, CDs, videos, music tablature, and educational resources. Plus, I produce and share exclusive new content each and every week. This includes Dulcimerica and Dulcimerica Deluxe, Mailbag Monday, Patreon Moments, In Studio with Futch, The Drone Zone, Tour Eats, Coaster to Coaster, and Disney Overload. I also share full-length concerts, backstage video and workshops for mountain dulcimer, ukulele, Native American flute, songwriting, and general music theory. Think of it as Netflix for my music and video, or Disney Plus if you're so inclined. The best part is you get all of this at the Pearl level for just $5 a month. That's less than the cost of a caramel macchiato at Starbucks, which is really tasty too. Now, if you subscribe at one of the other levels, there are extra rewards and perks available, like stickers, monthly EPs, discounts, t-shirts, private lessons, home-cooked meals, house concerts, music coaching, and even a day at Walt Disney World with me as your personal tour guide. Lots of fun. If you'd like to sample some of what I release on a weekly basis, please visit this link down here to go check out my Patreon open house. There are over 5 years of downloads there for you to enjoy. And if you like what you see in here, please do consider becoming a part of my art as a patron. This truly is one of the most incredible things I have ever been involved with, and I'm very deeply grateful to every single one of my patrons who's there for me as a part of my art every single day. Thank you guys so much, and thank you for visiting. Blessings of music to you all. We'll see you soon. Welcome to Dulcimerica, everybody. My name is Futch. Thank you for joining me. You'll notice that during that piece, as I was moving those chords around, I actually did a little bit of a focus on the bass, a little walk down. Now there's a chord that's happening there, but at the same time, I'm really holding down this bass. What's happening there is I'm playing a D major chord. But instead of just simply strumming a D major chord, I'm walking down this bass line. And when I go to my next chord, F sharp minor, that little line that walks down from D to C sharp to B to A, then ends down at F sharp, and that in itself is just a really cool little bass line. It's very lyrical. The best part about that is that since that is part of the melody and part of the chord progression, it didn't really require a whole bunch of thought to put it together. What you do see me doing is coming back against the string instead of going forward across the strings. That accents the bass, and I'm also reducing the amount of touch I've got on the other strings to really shine a spotlight on that bass. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. You guys actually requested to hear more about how to make your bass playing on your dulcimer come out. So this will be 2 weeks. Today we'll focus on playing bass in the guise of doing a chord melody style playing, and then next week we'll look at playing the bass as an individual instrument. So you can back up 2, 3, 4 or more people, and probably maybe using an amplifier at that point to make sure you're heard above everybody else. So to get into this, let's go ahead and take a look at exactly what a chord is. Once again, a chord is 3 notes or more, and a chord ingredient chart would be on the bottom. We have the root chord, also the name of the chord. So if we're playing a D major chord, I'll do it like this. We're playing a D major chord, that bottom note is going to be D. That middle note is going to be F sharp. And so that's the major third in the chord. And then we've got the top note, and that's going to be your perfect fifth. In this case, A. D, F sharp, and A make D major. When we play a D major chord on the mountain dulcimer, we're not always playing D as the bass. Like a 002 chord, we certainly are playing the D as the lowest note in the chord. And that's what we call a root position chord. Those notes are stacked right on top of each other if you're looking at it in standard music notation. However, the mountain dulcimer tune DAD, which I am in right now, we know that it's a symmetrical tuning. That means we can take our chord shapes and flip them over, invert them to rearrange the pitches. And the pitch is how high or how low a note is. So if I play a 002, I've got the bass on the bass string, D. But if I play 200, flip it over, now I've got F sharp. I've got the major third on the bass string as the lowest note. Is that weird? Is that wrong? No, not at all. In fact, there are many times you're going to want to do that on purpose, like I did at the end of the piece. Instead of just ending with a D on the bottom, I ended with a F sharp on the bottom, and it adds a bit more color and some movement to what you're doing. So know that for all of the D majors that we have here, your root is going to be located in a different place. 2, 3, 4 D major chord, that root is going to be on the middle string. So it's actually going to be the middle note. In terms of pitch, F sharp on the bass string is the lowest note in that chord, and the highest pitched note is A, the perfect fifth. If we flip that around though, now the lowest pitched note in the chord is A, the perfect fifth, D remains the middle note, and F sharp is now the highest pitched note. So what good are these inversions? What are they good for? One of the things they're good for is helping you to maintain a chord while playing melody. As many people know, one of the tricks to playing chord melody style on the mountain dulcimer or any instrument is to make sure that you've got that pitch. Your melody is the highest pitched note in the chord. There's something about a higher frequency that cuts through the mustard. As human beings, we can hear in a spectrum from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. But we're very, very sensitive to the 3,500 to 4,000 hertz range. There's something about that area where things get really picked up, from whispers to broken glass, things like that. So that higher pitched note is going to be closer to that frequency range, and no matter what you're playing underneath it, as long as it's the highest pitch, you're going to be able to cut through the mustard, as it were, and make sure that that pitch is heard. So if you're moving along and you've got, say, a melody that's going... and you want to keep a D major behind it at all times, you've got a lot of different options that you can use. So I use an open 002 for that one. Then maybe as I come down to here, my melody note is A, so I want to make sure I'm playing my A, but I still want there to be a D major. I have a couple of options. I can play this shape of a D major chord, or I can play this shape of a D major chord. Both work fine, but it depends on where I'm heading next with the melody and what kind of sound I'm looking for. I can use these inversions and different shapes. So like, for example, this. If my melody is an A, that's going to work out great. And I like that shape for its voicing. And a voicing is basically the arrangement of pitches inside of a chord. But let's say my melody is actually going to be F sharp instead. Well, now if I play a 4-3-2, flip that chord over, I can still serve the melody, keep it as the highest pitched note in the chord, while letting the other two strings do their thing, and it sounds a bit different. So knowing all of your chord shapes, and knowing all of the inversions will give you a wide range of options when you're putting your arrangements together or learning somebody else's arrangement. So we've got the root of the chord, the lowest pitched note on the bass. You got the middle, which we can call your treble drone, is what they used to call that string back in the day when I first started playing. And then you got your melody string, and the melody's going to be there on the top. So you can move chords all the day long, and as long as you keep your melody on the top, you're always going to be able to hear it. So that's very easy. You're pulling the other two parts of the chord along with you. Think melody first, and then think about adding two notes to that, which is going to equal a chord. It's a neat little trick that sounds really awesome on the mountain dulcimer, and you don't have to think too much about it. In fact, if you're playing with any sort of rhythm, the bass part really takes care of itself. But there are times when you'll want to call more attention to the bass and make it more of an arrangement. So I always suggest, instead of playing across the strings all the time, try playing and picking out of that, flat picking out of those chords and focusing a little bit on the bass. See how I'll hit the chord, and then instead of just hitting the chord a few more times with a strum, I actually come in there and I hit the bass by itself. And that's really all you need to do for, a measure or two, or briefly, maybe even the end of a measure, to do a couple little picks on the bass. And then you don't even have to change what your fingers are doing with the fretting, That's very, very simple. It's not very complex. It doesn't involve you playing a whole bunch of complicated bass lines, but it does, for just a moment, draw attention to the bass, and then when you go on and playing your chords and the melody, then the bass fades away back into the background. That's a very, very simple way of being more aware of the fact that you've got a bass player hanging out with you on your dulcimer. Another thing I like to do is to use an In-Strum and hit the bass first before I go and do anything else, and that again brings it to the forefront, and that's exactly what's happening in Squire Woods. In fact, what I'm doing there as I walk down the bass is I'm not even playing the middle string. I'm doing a counterpoint between the bass and the melody. Not only is that awesome for creating more space in your arrangement, but it's also great for dynamics. Instead of giving the same volume all the time, we can dip lower and quieter when we're not using all the strings, and then we can get a little bit louder and have something to build up to create a very, very nice dramatic rise in the music. So by paying attention to what you're doing on the bass string, you can really get a lot of mileage out of that. Now, to get really complex, we're going to be talking more about that next week and what you can do to really bring out the bass. But when it comes down to playing arrangements, one of the things I like to do is use inversions to get a little bit of walking back and forth. I'm going to use one of the most hated chord shapes in the world to demonstrate this, and that's going to be a 1-2-4. I know y'all love this one. I love it too. All right, and we invert that to a 4-2-1. So just playing the same bass note for each chord is perfectly fine when you're doing chord melody style. You're focusing mostly on melody. You don't want to spend a lot of time messing around with trying to come up with bass parts. But if you have a moment in time, there are some things that you can do before you get on to your next melodic phrase or what have you. So it's important to know, what is the bass actually doing? The bass is holding down the root of the chord, for example. If you're just playing one note, then just play the root of the chord and that's fine. But if you're going to get a little bit more active with the bass, you can actually play the root of the chord and the fifth of the chord, the very, very top, and go back and forth between them. For example, D major, the bottom of the chord, the root would be D, and the top of the chord would be A. So if I move the bass string between D and A, there I've got a nice, what we call a pendulum bass to go along. So I can strum all the way across the strings and do that. So that maybe you're playing a fiddle tune and you're going to take a few bars to do a little vamp like that before moving on again. And if that's the only time you do anything with that bass, it'll still be kind of an arrangement. So let's say I do let me go little Hangman's Reel. So forth and so on. You'll also notice that when I did that, I hit the bass string by itself, and then I hit the other two strings. And that is an arrangement that really works. It's going to give you your solid bass punch, and it's going to give you chops. And chops are those after beats. So play your bass, hit the other two strings, then hit the bass again, and hit the other two strings. If you were playing a G major chord, G is the root and D would be the top of that. So instead of going up from the root to the fifth like we did with D, in this case, because I want to keep those lower notes down around here, I mean, I could go from G up to D. But you see that D up there doesn't sound much like a bass. That bass at the bottom open does. So instead of going up from G to D, I'm going to go down from G to D. All right. In the case of A major, A is the root, E is the top of that. And so here's what I was going to show you. It's a little ridiculous, but I use it sometimes and it's kind of fun. If it wasn't the most hated chord in the mountain dulcimer world, I think a lot of people would do this. So A and E is what we're looking for. So here is A on our bass string. Now here's the trick. We were going to go from A to E, right? We're going to go down from A to E. If you're playing an A major chord, you need to be able to hold those chords and do that, which is hard to do if you're playing open and focusing on that bass string. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch back and forth between a 4-2-1 A major chord and a 1-2-4 A major chord. And what that's going to do for us is, if I do that, pick the bass string and then pick the other two strings and then switch and do it again, I get this. That's kind of nutty, isn't it? And yes, it is something you want to practice if you're going to try and pull that in somehow. But that allows you not only to play the A major chord, but also the supporting bass parts. And all I'm doing is pivoting on the middle string, which is there at C sharp. Pivot, leave it where it is, and then and a little secret. In order to keep it from being too messy when I take my fingers off the strings, I'm using whatever flesh I've got. I know that sounds weird. I'm using whatever I can do to mute the strings. See how I lay my thumb down? I'm trying to do that so that when I move, there's not a big rush of sound here. See how all that stuff kind of builds up in the background? So I try and mute the strings as much as possible. I'm also using my right hand, my palm mute down here, to help mute those strings as well. that just cleans things up a little bit. You can play the bass nice and long out like that. Or you can shorten it up a little bit and make it staccato, which adds a lot of punch and really sounds great. You may have seen bass players with the stand-up basses doing a slapping, doom chuk, doom chuk, doom chuk. You can do the same thing here. That inserts some gaps in between the notes and makes them stand out, give them more definition. It also helps in muting the strings and keeping them from going all over the place and buzzing on you and making additional noises when you take your fingers off. And with the palm mute, it rounds the sound out and makes it warmer, you know, as opposed to just doing this. If I put my palm down on the bridge of the instrument and roll it forward onto the strings, we get even more of a rounder bass sound. And I'm using an acrylic V-pick, but if you use a felt pick like a lot of bass players do, because bass players tend to play with their fingers, but if you use an acrylic pick, you're going to get a real shiny sound. But if you use a felt pick or a rounded edge pick, that'll actually warm your sound up a lot. And of course, I've got my bass side over here from my new Folkcraft double chromatic bass, and a fairly standard side with some 1.5, 8.5 goodies on there. But this, of course, is your bass sound. Typically, you'd play that with your fingers, and it would give you more of a round sound. But having a pick will give you more control over the attack and that type of thing. So there is no wrong way to approach playing the bass at all as far as what you're using to trigger the sounds. So that's a fun trick right there. Another thing that you can do is to get over there and play melody on that bass side and do some little runs. And as we learned with a recent series I did on the elements of song, Black Mountain Rag is what we used, and there's some fun stuff that you can do in Black Mountain Rag using a Johnny Cash style walking bass line. What I'm doing there, once again, is using the right hand palm mute to kind of calm things down and focusing on the bass string and not really touching the other strings too much. And you can bring that in to the middle of some tunes, maybe like a... so forth and so on. You don't have to play bass during the whole thing because your chord melody style and your drone is already doing that for you. So you can just add little moments of bass when you aren't too busy doing something else, and that is going to help you create a more dynamic arrangement. Again, think about the picking style that you're using, and instead of going all the way across the strings, think about doing a little extra something on just the bass string to draw it out for a moment and then put it right back where it was before. Kind of settled down into the mix and allowing the melody to ring out and be the strongest thing that you're hearing at any given time. I'll give you one more tip here, and then next week we'll be looking at playing the bass as an individual instrument. So we'll talk more about technique, we'll talk more about what notes to play, and how to deal with major versus minor and that sort of thing. And we'll be more on this side a little bit. But one more thing is, when you're making your own arrangements, you're trying to figure out different things about the bass, and you're listening to a piece of music. The bass literally is your key to understanding when a chord change is taking place, because 9 times out of 10, the bass is holding down the fort. It's holding down the foundation of the chord. So if you're listening to a piece of music and you're trying to figure out when the chord change is happening, listen to the lowest pitched note that you can hear, you know, and then at some point when that lowest pitched note changes, you know that the chord has changed. Hum, try to match what that note is, and then find it on your dulcimer, and then use that as the root of your new chord. And that's one way to kind of patch everything together. Don't be afraid to explore a bit and let these instruments take turns. If the melody has been stealing the spotlight for so long, maybe it's time to pass a little bit of something over to the bass string. In fact, I do a tune, actually I wrote a song called West Lafayette Real? Yes, like 3 or 4 years ago. And it has this part that goes, it goes, okay, the line goes down, everything kind of stops in the background, and purposely it does that, and then I do this little line, this little tag, and then I echo it on the bass. So there is, again, a lot of fun that you can have incorporating more active bass work in your work, but also, more importantly, is just not to think about it too much. Play the chord melody style you've always been playing, but then every once in a while, give that bass just a little extra attention, bring it forward in the mix, and then push it right back out again, just by doing a couple of extra strums or silencing your other strings and doing something solo on that bass string and bringing it back. And that's going to make you more aware of the power of the bass as a melodic instrument as well as an instrument of support. We'll focus more on that next week, as well as playing this as an individual piece, a part, playing just the bass to support other people. You don't worry about chords, you don't have to worry about harmonies. All you're doing is the bass, which gives you a lot of free rein to open up and expand your melodic possibilities and your groove possibilities as well. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you. We'll see you next week.